because of his fundamental decency and patriotism, he was seen by people in all of those groups as being fair-minded. Without him, I don't know how they hold it together, because he was really the linchpin that kept this from going off the rails a bunch of times.
Yeah, I mean, as he said, he was very generous, really, with Comey for a long time, giving him the benefit of the doubt, and he has been with Mueller all the way through.
But he was also very generous when people got out over their skis, when Jason Chaffetz first, but then certainly under, what's his name from California, under Nunes and others, when things were getting out of hand pretty fast, he was able to keep them back while also pushing the FBI forward. He did a masterful job. He will be badly missed by his party, and I would say by everybody else in Washington.
Richard?
Well, I think there's something remarkable that he said in the interview that we saw earlier with the segment with the two congresswomen. We talked about how Republicans say things, not what they say, it's how they say it. And I think if you look at this past midterm elections, I think it's very important as Republicans go into this new Congress as they focus on how they say things to the American voter and how they win back suburban women, which they have lost. And I think part of it is talking about your policies in a new and innovative way and changing the course which they're currently on.
Sometimes it's how we come across, Charlie.
Yeah, and he's and Chris is exactly right about so much of that. But he was also a guy that believed in trying to find compromise, but without giving up principle. And that's where a lot of politicians in Washington have blown themselves up.
But what's he going to do with his hair now? This is what I want to know. Now that he's not going to be on TV all the time, he can finally have the hairstyle he wants, and we're going to miss it. And I feel let down.
It took a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Figured it out. Everybody figures it out, right? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Good to be with all of you tonight. Good to be in Washington. That's our story from D.C. on this busy Wednesday. We'll see you back again tomorrow night in New York. Tucker's up next.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, the president has decided that the Republican Congress, during its final weeks in office, should fund a wall along our southern border with Mexico. That's not a new idea, obviously. Trump ran for office beginning 3 years ago on that very promise. Voters agreed with it. They elected him. Now he's demanding unequivocally that the wall finally get built. Now, at the same time, and this is not a coincidence, the American news media has identified the single most racist idea that anyone in the history of this country has ever come up with, and that is, of course, building a wall along our southern border with Mexico. Watch.
The president went to the heart of what I call his brown menace theory. These migrants, they're dirty people. They bring disease.
This border wall thing is about controlling the browning of America.
Donald Trump is fixated on the southern border, as he was the day that he announced this campaign. It is not about securing the borders. It is about xenophobic, racist, bigoted beliefs.
Well, so that couldn't be clear. Border walls are racist. We know that. Unlike border fences are not racist. They're much easier to climb over. And that's why Democrats have repeatedly voted to fund them. You could have lots of border fences and still wind up with 22 million illegal aliens living in your country. We have proved that conclusively over the years. Fences are the perfect solution if you're trying to pretend that you care about border security while simultaneously encouraging much of the third world to move here without permission. Fences are awesome for that. Yay, fences. But walls, well, as Nancy Pelosi has explained, walls are immoral. According to CNN, in fact, walls are nothing less than an attack on the human heart. Listen and learn.
And a wall won't solve it. All that he's doing is putting up walls around people's hearts.
And we are not a wall away from being better.
Don't waste billions of dollars of taxpayer money in order to build something that will not make our border more secure.
Yeah, and that's the other point they keep making. Walls don't work. They're totally ineffective, except in prisons and the Vatican and outside Barack Obama's house here in Washington and in almost every upper-income neighborhood in America where walls surround the front lawns of the homes where Hillary Clinton and Beto O'Rourke hold their fundraisers. But along international borders, walls are useless. A border wall would simply create a thriving new market in taller ladders. Jeb Bush used to say that all the time. Everyone in power agrees with him. They're nodding vigorously from their gated communities.
We need border security. The wall is a part of border security. You can't have very good border security without the wall.
That's simply not true. That is a political promise. Border security is a way to effectively honor our responsibility.
And the experts say you can do border security without a wall, which is wasteful and doesn't solve the problem.
It's wasteful. Walls won't solve the problem. All the experts agree on that. and they have briefed Chuck Schumer, and he's passing on the news to us. Okay, but before we accept Chuck Schumer's claim about walls as fact, just one simple question. What about Israel? Israel is our closest ally in the Middle East. It is the recipient of our largest foreign aid package by far. Pretty much everybody in Congress on both sides supports Israel, or claims to. Many of them were vocal about that support, including Chuck Schumer. And yet, here's the funny thing. Israel has plenty of walls, and not just the famous one that people pray at. Israel has border walls, some of them tall and foreboding and made of steel. Are Israel's walls immoral? Well, by Nancy Pelosi's standards, why wouldn't they be immoral? It's a pretty obvious question, so we've asked it repeatedly of Democrats on this show. And every single time we get the very same answer to the question. Israel's walls have nothing to do with immigration. They're defensive walls. They're designed to keep out terrorists and suicide bombers. There is no comparison to Israel's wall and anything that Donald Trump is proposing. It's apples and oranges. Well, it's a pretty effective talking point, and that's why every Democrat repeats it every time. But is it actually true? We got curious and decided to find out ourselves from a knowledgeable source in Israel. A short time ago, we spoke to David Rubin. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's the author of the book Trump and the Jews. We had a fascinating conversation. Listen. Mr. Rubin, thank you very much for joining us. There's a debate in the United States, as you're fully aware, over whether to erect a wall on our southern border to solve what is an immigration crisis. Israel has relevant experience with this exact topic. Will you explain what Israel did in response to its immigration crisis and the effect that the wall had on it?
Well, we certainly do have that experience, Tucker. Between 2010 and 2012, there were 55,000 illegal immigrants into Israel. Now, you have to understand, Israel is a tiny country, so 55,000 illegal immigrants in just a couple of years is a lot of illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
And most of them settled in southern Tel Aviv, which was already a working class or a little bit run-down area. The rapes and murders in southern Tel Aviv skyrocketed in those few years. The Israeli government, under pressure from the grassroots mainly, grassroots protests from the residents of South Tel Aviv and other towns that were being overrun by these illegal immigrants, the Israeli government made a decision that they were going to build a wall, a high-tech steel wall on the southern border, the border between Egypt and Israel. So it was built over the next few years. It was completed, almost completed by 2015. In 2016, the wall was up. 2016, there were 11 illegal immigrants who entered Israel. And then they raised the height of the wall an additional several feet. And in 2017, there was not one illegal immigrant that made it through the southern border into Israel. So
that is a remarkable story.
It works.
So was there
it's a story that's...
So I'm just wondering the political part of this. So the 55,000 illegal immigrants you're describing were from Africa, as I remember, Eritrea, Sudan, parts of Africa.
Correct.
Was there anybody in Israel who said, you're racist for trying to keep them out?
Well, there was some of that, yes. Some of the people on the left were going crazy and having protests, and they were complaining that it's a racist thing. But look, illegal immigration is illegal immigration. And I don't know if you know this, Tucker. I was born and raised in the United States. I've been living in Israel for 27 years. But the Jewish immigrants who came to America, and I wrote about this extensively in my book, Trump and the Jews, they came to America as legal immigrants. They came only to work hard and only to be full Americans. That was their goal. And so, I've heard people like Ocasio-Cortez from New York, the congresswoman, talking about how the immigrants, the migrants are just like the asylum seekers, the Jewish immigrants who are seeking to escape the Nazis in World War II. It's an obscene comparison, and I've heard it too many times from the left. So, yes, there was some in the Israeli left who were complaining and who were even accusing the Israeli government of racism. But the fact is that now nobody's complaining. Everyone is happy that we don't have illegal immigration to Israel.
That's an amazing story. And I hope that a lot of people watch this segment. Mr. Rubin, thank you for telling us what happened and your experience there. It's remarkable.
You're welcome, Tucker. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Jason Nichols is a professor of African American Studies at the University of Maryland and a frequent guest on the show, we are proud to say. Professor, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
So you just heard that kind of amazing story. I didn't know that. Tel Aviv, 55,000 illegal immigrants living there. The working class residents of the town said crime is going up. We're against this. Government of Israel builds a southern border wall, not to keep terrorists out, but to keep illegal aliens out. And no one in this country says anything. Is that immoral?
So I think there are lots of big differences between Israel and the United States. First of all, we know that crime has gone down in the United States steadily since 1991. Immigrants commit, both legal and undocumented, commit fewer crimes than Americans like you and I.
I don't know. I don't think that number is true. But leaving that aside,
but that's absolutely.
I don't believe it is actually. I think immigrants in the country commit crimes at a higher proportion.
No,
legal.
that's.
Okay,
we can look that up.
Separate debate. Okay, I'll even grant you that you're right in that. But why is it? And by the way, I just want to be totally clear. I support Israel's right to protect its own borders. It's a country; it gets to do that if it wants. But why is it immoral when we do it here, according to the Democratic Party, but not immoral when our closest ally in the region does it?
Well, again, part of this is because of the motivation that Mr. Trump has brought into this discussion. Also, the fact that I think there were certain things that the mayor said that were inaccurate. If you look at at immigration to the United States in the early 20th century, whether it was Jews, Italians, other groups, crime actually did go up. They were blamed for everything. They were blamed, they brought Cosa Nostra. They were blamed for all of these kinds of things. But when we want to sanitize our historical memory.
That's right. I mean, history changes over time. We shut down immigration.
We say, they were just here to work hard.
Well, okay,
and I'm sure they.
It's all complicated, but what's not complicated is that our closest ally in the region, our biggest recipient of American aid, built this wall, and the same people who supported building that wall, I'm one of them who supported it, are now telling us that an effort to protect our southern border in exactly the same way is, quote, immoral and racist. And I'm just wondering, what is the standard?
Well, when you're going around and you're saying that the people from our South are rapists and that they commit crimes when you actually don't have any empirical evidence to back it up, it sounds pretty much like it's xenophobic and racist.
You don't like Trump. Which is
it's not about
totally
Trump.
Fine, but how about
I have no feelings about Trump.
How about just taking Trump out of it? His motives, what he says. A lot of people would like a wall on our border, and they're confused because they hear Pelosi and Schumer say, "Well, a fence is fine, but a wall is immoral." What is the distinction exactly?
Well, I think again that the fence is not, even a fence is not necessarily what is going to lead to border security. And I think you and I actually agree. I read your book, which is actually a fabulous book. But
thank you.
I will tell you, when I read your book, the problems that exist with immigration, and I think Mike Pence actually has it correct, actually start in Central America. It's not at our border. So if we want to solve this problem, and if we're trying to stop, the things that the right talks about, the flow of drugs, one of the things that many experts say is that a wall or fence or any of that is not going to stop that. They're going to fly drones. They're going to find other ways
why
around
did it work in Israel? I mean,
we need to help.
We need to help them get better, those countries.
Within their borders, people oftentimes don't really want to be here. That's the other thing.
Well, so I guess, there are a couple of things, but I'll just focus on one. So, lots of people have tried to make Honduras a better country, a lot of great Hondurans. But the country itself, beginning with the government, is dysfunctional, okay? That's why Hondurans and Guatemalans want to move here. So what would be the plan for fixing those countries to the point where they would have such a high standard of living and be so peaceful that people wouldn't want to leave? Is there a formula that none of us know?
I think, the reason that it's dysfunctional, and again, having read your book, is U.S. intervention that happened throughout the late 70s and early 80s.
So you're saying that Guatemala and Honduras weren't dysfunctional before the United States for reasons that are unclear?
I would say that the thing that brought people to our borders that has caused both documented and undocumented immigration, that has driven that, has been the wars that we have created that have cost thousands upon thousands
Well, we
of lives.
didn't. I mean, I'm against
Central
most
America.
foreign intervention, including there. I agree with you there. But we didn't create those wars. Of course, we intervened in them because we thought it was in our interest.
We propped up the Contras.
We may have. We certainly did, but we didn't create the Sandinista Marxist revolution that enslaved the country of Nicaragua, of course.
Well,
but really quick, my question is. So what does that mean now? Does it mean that because we feel so bad about something that our leaders did 30 years ago, we have to pay the penance of illegal immigration? Does it mean we have an obligation to fix those countries? If so, how do we do that?
I think, investment and partnership with democratically elected leaders in those countries.
Where's that worked? Anywhere ever?
Has
that ever worked? Because we spend all this money abroad, and it seems to just make the countries more corrupt and the average person poorer and more desperate come here. Has it ever worked?
Well, I think that there are certainly ways that we can do this where it would work. And we've always had the goal of colonizing a place when we actually try to help them. And I think the best bet is to go enter into partnerships with democratic.
So how about this one? Since we're in the reparations business, and boy, I'm open-minded about everything, as you know. But if we owe Latin America something, what if they flooded our communities with drugs and killed, I don't know, 50,000, 70,000 people a year? What would
still wouldn't equal the amount of people we killed there.
I don't think that's right, actually. A year. So more people die of drug ODs in this country every year than died in all of Vietnam Americans over 11 years. So what do they owe us? Anything?
So again, we're going to disagree about.
I'm just wondering if it's a two-way street. I mean, can we collect for the fentanyl epidemic? It seems like we should.
Yeah, well, again, I think that the fentanyl epidemic has many different layers to it. It's not just coming from Central America.
No, it's a lot of it's coming from China, but a lot of it's moving through Mexico. So I'm just wondering, what does Mexico owe us for killing tens of thousands?
Well, again, we were talking about Central America. We were talking about Mexicans.
Sure.
Oh, they're all the same? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that. We've learned recently that nobody dislikes Central Americans more than the people of Mexico. I actually like Central Americans. The average citizen in Tijuana does not feel that way. Not as open-minded as I am, I would say that. Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker.
France, moving to the other side of the globe, facing some of the worst riots in that country since they chopped off the head of the king, thanks in large part to climate change policy. Is there something for us to learn from the fires raging there tonight? That's after the break. Well, you've been told many times if you watch TV that America needs to join the Paris Climate Accord immediately. Pulling out of it was immoral. And to do your part to fight global climate change, you need to accept burdensome taxes on the energy you use. It's the least you can do. But what about the people claiming you need to do this? Are they willing to pay their share? Well, in a recent piece in the Daily Caller, ran in the Daily Caller News Foundation, reporters Chris White and Michael Bastash contacted 31 major corporations, foundations, and individuals who have endorsed the Paris Climate Accord. And they asked a very simple question. The simple ones are the most revealing. Here's what they asked. If climate change is indeed the existential threat you say it is, would you support a ban on all private jet travel? Now, these are deeply moral people, they asked. Obviously, you see them on television. They care in a way that you never will because you're too shallow. So are they willing to do this? No, not one of them. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg spent more than $1 million flying private over the past couple of years. His company didn't even bother to respond. Neither did Google or Apple or, by the way, Al Gore, who flies private all the time. In fact, only 2 of the 31 companies contacted responded at all. And both said they, buckle your seatbelt now, oppose banning private jets because they use them. You, meanwhile, are sinful for driving an SUV to pick up your kids at hockey practice, just so you know. Well, if the people who lecture us really did make major sacrifices to stop the global warming scourge they tell us so much about, the rest of us might be more inclined to follow their example, but they won't. So when the elites impose new taxes for the sake of climate change, ordinary citizens are sometimes driven to protest instead. And in France, they're protesting in a very intense and sometimes violent way. Here's part of it. That's Paris, not a war zone. Dana Perino hosts the Daily Briefing, of course, with Dana Perino, and enlivens the 5 every day at 5. She joins us tonight. Dana, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
I think the argument over whether climate change is happening is less interesting than the debate over what we do about it. And I'm just so struck by the people who are telling us, and maybe they're right, by the way, I don't know, I'm not a climate scientist, that this really is the moral question of our time, the moral test of our time, and an existential threat to life as we know it, are really not making the kind of sacrifices you'd expect from someone who sincerely believed the threat was that profound. Why do you think that is?
Well, and that has been true for all the years that we've been talking about this. I cut my teeth on Capitol Hill as a staffer for the chairman of the Energy and Power Subcommittee. Right, remember when Janet Yellen came and talked about global warming, like way back then? I'm dating myself a little bit. And even back then, I mean, you knew immediately that there were things that maybe we could do, but that just the law of physics at this point in time means that you cannot actually just eliminate fossil fuels completely. Right. And here's a mantra that I want everyone to remember. Elites care about global warming. Drivers care about fuel prices. And politically, drivers always win. Okay, so for all of these people
That's a very good equation.
that want to
like
go
that.
to, you know, they're going to, the Democratic candidates that want to take on President Trump in 2020, they're going to be heading not to San Francisco to campaign. They got to go to Iowa first, and that's going to happen in February. And so they need to remember that the things that help them get campaign donations from San Francisco and New York, that's not going to work in Iowa. And the United States has actually been able to grow its economy and decrease its emissions. Could we do more? Yes. Well, you know how you do more? A growing economy helps you do that because then you have the money to invest in it.
Yes.
It is places like China in particular that has a huge problem. But the more that we can do to innovate, we can try to help solve this problem. But, you know, ridiculing people is not going to work.
No, and by the way, if you really believe that climate change is all that matters and you're flying on a private plane, I mean, you need to really look in the mirror and think deeply. Do you think that a carbon tax will become a component of the debate in the next election?
I not only think that a carbon tax will become a component, I think that will become a litmus test for Democratic candidates trying to seek the 2020 Democratic nomination for president. And they got to be careful about that. Now, however, let me just tell you, remember the departed Charles Krauthammer. Very conservative, understood these things very well. See, the thing is that Economists love a carbon tax. It's very transparent.
Right.
It's very direct. Politicians hate a carbon tax for that very same reason. There might be some good reasons to actually do a carbon tax if you were to reduce taxes in another way. That was Charles Krauthammer's proposal, and I think that you could see that. But I don't think that Democrats are going to actually propose a carbon tax that goes along with a tax cut somewhere else. I don't see that happening.
Right. They're going to call it the Green New Deal, and the rest of us will never figure out what's in it. Until it's too late. Dana Perino, thank you for that update. And also that
remember the
prediction.
mantra.
There are more drivers than there are Sierra Club executives. That is totally true.
There you go.
Great to see you. Well, the left feels perfectly entitled to fire you and destroy your life whenever you say something they don't like, but they don't feel limited the same way themselves. Striking. Details ahead. If you grew up in this country, you remember hearing it when you were a kid. This is a free country. The Constitution gives us freedom. And the first freedom, literally the first number in the Bill of Rights, is freedom of speech. And for generations, that was unquestioned here. It was the most celebrated of our rights. But increasingly, it is seen by the people in charge as an annoying relic. Don't believe us? Try to say something unauthorized in your workplace or on campus or even on a street corner. Why have things changed? Well, because the attitudes of our leaders have changed, and we have a small clip that tells you a lot about what they really believe. This is California Congressman Ted Lieu, and he's explaining in this clip that sadly he's prevented from banning talk he doesn't like by a pesky legal antique called the Constitution. Watch this.
I would love to be able to regulate the content of speech. The First Amendment prevents me from doing so. And that's simply a function of the First Amendment. But I think over the long run, it's better that government does not regulate the content of speech.
The CNN anchor just sort of nods like, yeah, of course, we'd all like to regulate speech if we could. Over the long run, he says, it's better not to regulate speech, end quote. Does that sound like someone who is deeply committed to a free society and its benefits? Or is it simply a bully admitting that for now, the law won't let him do what he wants to do, which is control your mind? I think you know the answer. Well, the left increasingly is using big tech, threats, and public shaming to stamp out political views it doesn't like. They're also ruining actors and comedians and anyone else who dares stray from the script. But not everybody is so limited. We learned that today when one cable host used a slur to describe a member of the Trump administration.
Why doesn't Mike Pompeo care right now? Are the pathetic deflections that we just heard when he appeared on Fox and Friends, is that a patriot speaking or a wannabe dictator's butt boy? And I'm dead serious. I'm asking, are these the words of a patriot?
So the anchor apologized for that remark, but the question is, will she be punished? And of course, needless to say, we don't think she should be punished. She was saying what she thinks, or she misspoke. It happens to everybody. She shouldn't face sanction for that, but then neither should Kevin Hart. But the left now has a long history as the only faction enjoying impunity for what it says.
You talk like a sign language gorilla who got hit in the head. In fact, the only thing your mouth is good for is being Vladimir Putin's holster. Your presidential library.
You give him a damn robe and you let him do whatever the hell he wants. Because this right now, this is my audition for Mr. Trump's cabinet. And also for a regional production of The Crucible. And let me tell you, Queen, I was good.
Dave Rubin hosts the Rubin Report on YouTube, which doubtless everyone watching has watched because it's excellent. And he joins us tonight. Dave, thanks a lot for coming on. So just to be totally clear, I don't,
Good to be with you, Tucker.
Well, people ought to be able to tell jokes that I don't like, and often they do. What I find so interesting is at this moment of peak hysteria about speech, where you're seeing normal, decent, totally non-bigoted people destroyed, and the rest of us are completely terrified, and art and free expression is totally ground to a halt. Aesthetics are suffering. No one can be creative anymore. At that exact moment, the left still feels totally free to say things that they would classify if others said them as bigoted. What's going on?
Well, you just nailed it right there. I mean, quite literally, the Oscars can't even figure out who to host the show anymore, either because they can't find anyone that's politically correct enough, or that everyone that would like to do it is now afraid to do it because of the repercussions. But as for the clips that you just played, I mean, look, the simple truth of this is it's showing what the flaw of collectivism, which is basically the idea of judging people based on their immutable characteristics, why it is so terrible and why it has been embraced by the left. You know, you can't be for groups. It actually doesn't make sense because you will eliminate the individual every time. So to say you're for gays doesn't really mean anything, because then when they want to make a joke about you, then they'll make a gay joke. Or to say you're for women, what they don't really, that doesn't mean anything. That's a very low resolution way of saying something. Everyone's for women, let's say, but they're not really for women. Are they for Nikki Haley, a brown woman who happens to be a conservative, who's a strong woman? Of course they're not for her. So to view people through this very obvious and what I would say really is just a dumb and insulting lens, you see it drop every time they speak off the cuff. It drops because they don't really care about the individual. And the Ted Lieu clip that you played at the beginning of this, I mean, man, I don't know when the last time I heard something that chilling coming from a government official. It's like the First Amendment is the most precious thing that we have in this country. And I can tell you, as someone that's been on tour for most of the last year, and I've been to 20 some odd countries in the last couple of months, every single country, the people are jealous of the freedoms that we have here, and especially the freedom of speech. So it's like to hear anyone, regardless of whether he's a Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, to hear any elected official saying that, you know, he'd love to get rid of the First Amendment. Whew, I mean, I can't imagine anything scarier in a free society, actually.
Well, very quickly, I mean, and I don't want to pound on the anchor. I don't even know who it was in that clip, but it was a news anchor whose living obviously is predicated on the First Amendment. Didn't interrupt him and say, "What? I'm sorry, Mr. Elected Official. Did you just say you'd like to control people's speech?"
Yeah, well, it's just incredible. And we're seeing an emboldening of this. You know, it's interesting what you said there, that these are the same people who love to shut people down, but then at the same time, they'll accidentally or they'll intentionally say some of these things. You may have seen this today, Deadspin, which is just another one of these sites that just churns out a lot of sort of lefty nonsense. They ran a piece today that basically said, the title of the piece was something to the effect of, conservative gays should shut the F up. I mean, imagine that. Imagine judging people based on those immutable characteristics while at the same time telling those people that you're supposedly their allies. And that's why, again, as I always say to you, Tucker, every time I'm on your show, what do I tell you? For all the disagreements, the political disagreements that we might have, which we've discussed on both my show and your show, because you are a staunch defender of free speech, I will continue to do this with you, whether we agree or not. That's what America is about, and that's what these people are just tossing away.
If they control your speech, they control your mind. And that's never going to happen. Dave, thank you very much. It's a great Dave Rubin. Appreciate it.
You got it, man.
New legal filings suggest the FBI misled Michael Flynn on purpose in order to trap him in criminal charges. Is that the kind of country you want to live in, where your government tries to lure you into committing crimes? A question worth asking, and we will after the break. Well, for years now, we've heard how American democracy is under siege from a country with an economy about the size of the state of Texas, but nevertheless somehow has limitless and corrupting resources. That, of course, is Russia, led by Vladimir Putin. So the question is, just how much did Russian meddling amount to in the 2016 election? That question's been outstanding for a while, but yesterday we got some details. The Google CEO Sundar Pichai appeared on Capitol Hill and was asked. Watch.
Does Google now know the full extent to which its online platforms were exploited by Russian actors in the election 2 years ago?
We have, we undertook a very thorough investigation, and in 2016, we now know that there were two main ad accounts linked to Russia, which advertised on Google for about $4,700 in advertising. We also found other limited...
Total of $4,700?
That's right.
$4,700. In other words, about the price of dinner for five with vodka at a good restaurant in Moscow. To put it in political terms, Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 spent about $768 million total, and that means that Hillary spent more than $1,600 for every penny the Russians spent on Google. But nobody in Washington is rejoicing about how secure our democracy is. That's not surprising, because protecting democracy was never the point. Undermining it, needless to say, has always been the point. More and more evidence emerges, by the way, that the Department of Justice may deserve a new name, because justice is not clearly the top priority. Newly filed court documents show that FBI Deputy Director Andy McCabe advised Michael Flynn not to bring a lawyer to his interview with federal agents in January 2017. Flynn inexplicably, moronically agreed to that. Agents then deliberately chose not to warn Flynn that he could be criminally charged for false statements. Then they sprang criminal charges on him after his interview. Jonathan Turley is a professor at George Washington University Law School, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So the first... just the troubling takeaway is clearly Flynn should have brought a lawyer.
Right.
And message to those watching at home, if the FBI is interviewing you, bring a lawyer. I mean, that's not. But do you want to live in a country where the government seeks to mislead you in order to get you to commit a crime? That doesn't seem like justice.
Well, it does answer the question of who's the last guy who believes, trust us, we're the government, and apparently that would be Michael Flynn. But you also have to put in context, this was right at the beginning of essentially at the administration, during the transition.
Yes.
And he answered a bunch of questions, a great number of them apparently, and the agents knew that some of those answers didn't fit very well with what they knew. And what's fascinating about the information we have is they made the conscious decision not to raise those with him. So there is a certain feeling of a trap here that obviously he never clued into. Now, this wouldn't bother me as much if they nailed him on something significant. If they had, the 7 heads in a duffel bag that they found.
Exactly. That's right.
But instead, they nailed him on a false statement about a meeting that was not just lawful, but not particularly unprecedented. He met with Russians as the incoming national security advisor during the transition. That's not unprecedented. He spoke to them about policy, and he omitted the fact, or he denied, that they had talked about sanctions. That does seem like something that you could miss, something that frankly could skip your mind. So the question is, if the agents had raised that with him, would he have corrected the record? I don't know. But at the end of the day, what's really troubling is not just the fact that they proceeded to criminalize it, but that the initial agents apparently did not believe he was intentionally lying, and they did not recommend the charge. Now, you now fast forward to where we are now, and I can only imagine what Flynn might be thinking in reading the recent filings, because in one of the footnotes for Cohen, the prosecutors note that he came in and made all types of false statements about all types of stuff to investigators, and then simply says matter-of-factly, he then corrected those statements. And I could imagine Michael Flynn reading this thing, wow, okay, what happened to my chance to correct?
That's so awful. So Cohen, who's clearly a practiced liar and a sleazy person by his own admission, Flynn, who's not, I don't think Flynn's a liar, actually. I don't think he ran an intelligence agency for the U.S. military. I mean, he's, had to be polygraphed. How sad is this? to destroy a man's life over this.
Well, it is sad, considering his career as a whole. But he was the unwitting victim of trust, and it is a cautionary word for everyone in Washington.
It's so sad. It's our government. We pay for it. We vote for it. We shouldn't be mistreated by it on purpose, I don't think. Right. You laugh knowingly. You've lived in Washington
too long.
Okay. Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, there's shown no evidence against him, but the press is still pushing evidence-free claims of sexual harassment against Brett Kavanaugh. Lisa Booth has been following this story and joins us next to explain it. Stay tuned. Sports Illustrated recently honored former gymnast Rachel Den Hollander as its Inspiration of the Year for being the first person to publicly accuse Larry Nassar of sex abuse. And that's fine. Nassar did it. He's a convicted sexual predator. He'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. But here's the interesting part. To honor Den Hollander, Sports Illustrated had her introduced by Professor Christine Blasey Ford, whose allegations, by contrast, against now Justice Brett Kavanaugh remain not just unproven, but lacking any evidence at all. None. So why the pairing? Lisa Booth is a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Voice, and she joins us tonight.
Hi, Tucker.
So, Lisa, thank you for coming on. Is the idea that Christine Blasey Ford has somehow ascended to the pantheon of people we believe unquestionably? She's like an official victim now?
I think that's what it looks like. And I think that's the danger more broadly with the Me Too movement, because it presumes that every woman is telling the truth and every man is guilty. And that's what we saw with the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. And I think that's why so many people like myself took issue with the way that he was being treated in the left, because the comparison between the two stories is both intellectually dishonest and it's just wrong. I have no problem with Rachel receiving this award. She was unquestionably brave by bringing those allegations against Nassar. There were 300-something women that stepped forward to also bring forward allegations. 125 brought forward criminal complaints. The problem is putting her in the same category with Christine Ford, who has no corroborating evidence, no corroborating witnesses. If anything, one of her best friends, who she named, Leland Kaiser, said that she's never met Brett Kavanaugh, does not remember the party in question, and later told the FBI that she felt pressured, or at least reportedly felt pressured by Ford's friends to change her story. By the time the Washington Post first ran Christine Ford's story, she had already changed her story a few times. Her polygraph letter alone has 2 different accounts of how many people were at the party in question. And you remember Rachel Mitchell, who is the prosecutor that Republicans tasked with cross-examining her, she said that in the cases of he said, she said cases are very difficult to prove, but this is even weaker than that. So to equate the two is so wrong, so intellectually dishonest, and I think just dangerous precedent to be setting.
Well, it's totally insulting, and thank you for pointing that out. Lisa Booth, great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, one of our friends here at Fox invented something for real. He's an inventor, and it's now on the market. Selling it is raising revenues for the families of our country's veterans. He joins us next to tell us what he made. Stay tuned.